there's a bunch of different programs that you could use to make textures for Sims 4 CC. I personally use Krita, mainly because it's free, and it's what I've been using for years. So if you go to krita.org/in/download/krita-desktop, that's a very long thing to say, but I will leave a link in the description. Then you can just click this first blue button. I don't know if there's an Apple version, Mac, but for Windows 10, you're just going to click that and go through the install process like you would any program. I already have it installed, so I'm obviously not going to install it again. Once you open it for the first time, it's going to look a little bit different than how it looks for me, just because I've set it up to specifically help me with my workflow. And I'm going to show you how I set it up so that if you're trying to follow my tutorials, it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. We're going to start by just creating a new file. This file doesn't matter much, because what we're worried about is this layout. So you're going to have different things open here on the sides, but these are the ones that I do. I'm going to close all of them just so that I can show you exactly how to get them. So if you close all of yours, you'll be able to set it up the same way. I'm going to move that over like that. So if to get those windows back up, you're going to go to Settings, Dockers, and the ones that I have are Advanced Color Selector, Brush Presets, Layers, Overview, Palette, Patterns, Specific Color Selector, Tool Options, and Toolbox. And Toolbox is just this main one. I don't actually see an X button for that anyway, so I'm guessing you didn't find a way to close it. But if you're missing that far one to the left, it's the Toolbox. Now, when you first open these, they're not going to show up in the same pattern. But every single one of these you can drag around however you want. You can have them floating in the middle of the screen if you want them to be for some reason. But that's probably not what you want to do. So starting... Oh, I didn't even know that you could put them at the top. Apparently you can put them at the top. So starting over here at the left, the main thing that I do is the Advanced Color Selector. And this actually has some options. I don't remember what the defaults were for this, but I do HSV, and then on the Shade Selector I do Minimal, Display, Color Patches, and if you want to look at these numbers, this is how I have these three, those swatches set up. The line count, the line height, the patches, color history. I have color history on, and I'm pretty sure that the Shade Selector and the color history are the main ones that I've edited. That's a bit more advanced, so I'm not going to go through them all, but click OK once you're done with that, if you want to change this at all, of course. And then next to the colors, because it's still related to colors, is Palette. And I use this just for mainly my plain onesies. I made my own personal palette. This is just kind of like a main palette, this top part. And then for all of my plain onesies, plain anything, these are like the base colors that I use. And I'm not going to show you how to set that up right now, just because I kind of don't remember, honestly. But that's there. And like you saw me do, so if you grab one of these at the top and wait till something under it turns blue, then it becomes, it's in the same place, and it just makes these tabs here. Then you can drag the tabs in whatever you want. Then also similar, also, I feel like it's related to colors, is patterns. and again, I'm going to put that in the same spot. You're not going to have the same patterns as me because I've done some custom ones, but that's patterns, and I'll show what we'll do with that probably in a different video. I don't think I'll cover patterns here. This is also color related, but I don't use the specific color selector very often. If you're trying to find a specific hex code, it's really useful. Like I said, I don't use it that often, so I actually hide it over here. So I'll put that over here for now, and we can go over that in a bit. So then below the colors, I do tool options. And next to the tool options, I do brush presets, and I do the brush presets after the tool options. And then over here on this side, we have overview. We have the specific color selector on the same thing as the overview. The overview is essentially just, it shows like the whole canvas. So even if you zoom in and draw something here, it doesn't update automatically, but you have to let it load. But that way, no matter how zoomed in you are, you can still see the whole picture, just, you know, kind of small. And then below overview, I do layers, and I like to make my layers really big, just so that, because sometimes I end up with a ton of layers, and I want to still be able to see them without having to scroll through a bunch of things. So that's what that is over there. Okay, so now, if you've got this far and have everything set up, then you should be pretty well set to follow along most of my tutorials. And with that all done, I can start getting into these different tools and the different things that I use when recoloring textures or making my own textures. So for starters, the main tool, pretty basic tool, is the brush. And you can get that by clicking B, and over here there should be a tooltip for what keys I'm pressing, so that if I forget to mention a shortcut key, because I'm probably going to forget because I just do it second nature, honestly, you should be able to see what that is. So the brush, pretty self-explanatory, just like any painting program has a brush, and that's where the you can use the brush presets. This is the one that I use, this basic one, like 90% of the time. That's going to be what I use. This is also where you're going to find your eraser. I'm going to make a new... and one thing that I use frequently with the brush tool is if you're selected with the brush tool, and whichever brush you have selected, and you hold down Shift and then click and drag with the left mouse button, it will resize your brush. So that's a really quick way to resize your brush instead of having to go up here and try to get a specific number and try to guess how big you want it. You can just resize it by holding Shift and clicking and dragging. The other shortcut while on the brush tool is to hold down Control, and that will give you a color picker so that you can just pick whatever color is under this thing. So let's make some different swatches so that you can see how this works. So right now, if we have the gray selected, if I hold down Control, you'll see that little square is the color that I currently have. But if I click now, even though I'm holding down Control, you don't see that square because it's the same color as what's under it. But if we go over here, so that's the quick color selector option, and that works on several different things, pretty much any drawing tool. So the brush, the line, the rectangle, you can hold down Control to select a different color. And see here, these swatches on the side is the color history that I showed you here. So if you have been using a bunch of different colors and you're like, oh dang, I forgot to color this one part that I want the same color as this, you don't have to go and try to find that exact color again. You can just look at your color history, or you can clear your color history. So that's the brush and the eraser. The other ones that I use, the other brushes that I use, is if you go to pixel art and this first pixel brush, this will make, it's essentially for specific, you can see how all of these pixels are sharp and crisp, compared to, say, this guy, where when I draw with this, it kind of smooths it out a bit. So the pixel brush I mainly use when trying to make like straight lines. I'll show that with the line tool in a second. But that's the pixel brush, and then the other one that I use semi-frequently are these like blending brushes. Mainly this Q-tip is going to, you know, blend. This guy always weirds me out a bit, but kind of rakes it. And you can mess around with the different blending tools if you want to use them, or any of these brushes. But those, so you're aware, are the ones that I mostly use. This pen, the eraser, the pixel brush, and that Q-tip looking smudge tool. After the brushes, there's the line tool, which doesn't seem to have a shortcut to it, I've never used the shortcut to it, so... and the line tool is going to use whichever brush you have selected. So right now, it's this brush, and as you can see, it used that brush. If I make it smaller, I can't change the size of the brush while in the line tool. So you'd have to be on brush to change the size of it, but if we're on the line tool, and the brush is smaller, it's going to make a smaller line. If you're on the line tool and you select the eraser, it's going to erase. I don't think the line tool and the smudge tool would work very well, but this is one specific place where I use the pixel brush a lot, because if we make our line, see, it's got those, like the anti-aliasing effect on it. One thing with the line, if you hold down shift, or click, hold down shift, and then drag, it will kind of snap it to specific angles, so that you can get a line that's like straight across. So that's with like this regular brush that I use. Even on the straight across line, you'll see that there's weird like fading effect going on at the side. So that's why this is the situation where I would use the pixel brush. So you can see that makes a much straighter line, and even if we turn down the size, like, it's crisp, there's no like weird smudging, blurring effect going on. But that, again, is, so that's the line tool. Pretty basic. After that, we've got the rectangle, the circle, and the polygon tool are all kind of the same, all have the same functions, essentially. So with the rectangle tool, your settings, I'm pretty sure that base settings are fill, not filled, and outline, brush. So what that's going to do is, it seems pretty self-explanatory, it's going to have it be a blank rectangle, like nothing in the middle, not filled, and then it's going to use whatever brush you have selected to make the outline. I don't know many uses for this. I think I've maybe used it twice in the whole time that I've used this program. I normally have it set to fill as foreground color and outline as no outline. So if you're not aware, fill, or the foreground and background color, if you look up here at this tiny little square, this color at the top is your foreground color. This color at the bottom is your background color. Really, there's not much that you need to know about these, but that's what it means when it says foreground or background color. That's these. So if you set it to foreground color, no outline, then it's going to make your rectangle in whichever color you have selected. And you can also mess with these settings, so if you want like the corners to be rounded, now they're rounded, versus this when it's just perfect, straight at 90 degrees. The other setting that I use with this is to do fill as pattern. So that is going to do whichever pattern you have selected here. And again, there are settings you can mess with. So the scale, if you have it at 100% versus 50%, you'll see that makes it smaller. Patterns, again, like I already mentioned, is a bit more of a complex topic that I'll probably go into in a different video, because there's a lot of cool things that you can do with patterns that makes making some really cute clothing quickly a lot easier. But for now, mainly I use it with the foreground color. And the shortcut for the rectangle tool is Control Shift R. It's Shift R, not Control R. And then circle tool is pretty similar, has the same options. It's just going to make, you know, an ovular shape. And with both the rectangle and the circle tool, if you hold down Shift while doing it, so that's going to make it a perfect circle, and with the rectangle tool, that's going to make it a perfect square. Polygon tool I don't use very often, but it's just like a make a weird pointy shape, but has the same options as those other two. After all those shape tools, we've got the transform tool. So let's actually draw something here really quick, just so that we've got something to mess with. I don't know. So the transform tool, the shortcut key for that is going to be Control T. So if you're on something else, Control T will open this right up. Main things that you've got in the tool options here are free transform. So this one I use more often than any of the others. You've got position, rotate, scale, shear. Scale, pretty self-explanatory, is going to change the size of it. So if you click any of these little handles, that's going to scale it. If you hold down Shift, it'll lock it to be the same proportions. You can also mess with the numbers. If you wanted to have it be exactly half the size, then you can just type it in over here. The other thing is if you click this link button and then change one of the numbers, it'll change both of them. And having that link button clicked will also make it so if you're dragging it here, it stays the same ratio. So that's the scaling. And then after that, you've got position. Again, you can just click anywhere within this area. If it's got those little 4 arrows, then you can click and drag it somewhere. Or you can come down here and put in specific coordinates. And these coordinates are going to be where this little crosshair is. So right now, it's at the center of the image. So if you want it to be completely centered, this is a 1024 wide, so 512 would be the center, and then it's, is it? No, it's exactly 1,000. So 500 would be the center, and then 300 would be the center vertically. So X is going to be horizontally where it is, Y is vertical. And so again, this is based on where the crosshair is. You can click and drag this crosshair wherever you want. So now you can see that it's no longer 500 and 300 because the crosshair has been moved up here. But if you want that section centered, again, you can just type those in. You can also put like math equations in here. So if we want it to be moved over just 64, you can do plus 64 and hit enter, and that will move it that specific amount of pixels. In addition to being able to drag this crosshair, you can also use these buttons that will snap it to a corner or the middle of a side. So if you want the top left corner to be exactly at 0, 0, so it's just at the edge of the screen, then you can do that. Rotate is pretty self-explanatory. Again, it will rotate around wherever you have that crosshair. So if you wanted to rotate around the center, you would want the crosshair in the middle. Holding down Shift will snap it to, I don't know what they are increments of, but probably increments of 10. And again, you can type in specific numbers. X is horizontal, so if we... Yeah, the X one is weird, because, like... Oh, they're all weird. Oh, except Z. So Z is the one that you would... that is the most intuitive on a 2D program. So, if you move this wheel, drag it, or set a specific rotation, X and Y essentially act as if the object is in 3D space. So as you can see, as I was moving this, it's like rotating it that way. I don't ever use those for making CC, but it is there. There's also a mirror tools, both vertical and horizontal mirror tools. And then shear is going to, like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe that other than shear, because that's what it's called. All of these things, for the most part, are actually, you don't have to necessarily click on these. So, as you can see, even if I'm on scale, I can still move it by clicking on it. Even if I'm on rotate, I can still scale it this way, and again, holding shift will lock the thing. Oh, and when you're moving it like this, holding shift will lock it to an axis. So if you're moving it side to side, it'll make sure that it stays in the same position vertically. If you try moving it up and down, it'll stay in the same position horizontally and not like move off to the side like that. And then rotate, if you hover near the corners, you can rotate it. And shearing, if you hover near the top or bottom or the front or either of the sides, you can shear it. So after that, the only other tool I use frequently here is the perspective. So that's free transform, that's perspective. Oh, and also, when you're done, if you've been using the transform tool and you are happy with where you want it, you want to hit enter. And that will, like, lock it in place what you've done. If you're, if you realize you messed something up, and you can't just undo it, because you're, like, way too far gone, then hit escape. And it'll go back to where it was before you start messing with the transform tool. If you click on the transform tool and you realize that there's nothing to select, you just have to click on the object. And it depends on which layer you're on. So you have to be on the correct layer to transform that layer. Yeah, so enter to confirm the changes you've made. Perspective, so with the perspective tool, you can still move it around, but then if you grab any of these corners, it'll actually, like, they move by themselves. So unlike when you're scaling it, like, all of these can be moved independently of each other. I don't actually know what, oh, I've never messed with that before. I mostly, oh, that's not what I want. I mostly use the perspective tool when trying to copy patterns from onesies, because sometimes they're, you know, a little skewed because they were on an actual model and I'm trying to get it to be flat, like as if it were still a flat piece of fabric when it's already been sewn into a 3D shape. So the perspective tool is nice for trying to line up the different parts of the pattern. And these other ones I don't use that often, but you can mess around with them and see what they do. They're just different ways of moving your thing around. But like I said, I don't use them that often. After those, the main thing I use is select. So select is pretty self-explanatory, the basics of it anyway. You know, just like any select tool in any program. The main things that we are going to look at, so all of the select tools have this action. So this is going to be replaced. So like you see, I have this selection, then I realize I want to select something over here. It deletes the original selection and makes a new one. Intersect, I just don't use. I'm sure there's places where it would make sense, but we have this original selection. We select this area. It's just going to get the section that's the same between the two selections. So if you have a selection over here, and then you select over here, it's not going to have anything selected because there's nothing intersecting. Add, if you have a selection and you make a new selection, it just adds it to the selection. So there's no, it doesn't get rid of the original place. Subtract removes the selection. With either replace or subtract, if you hold down shift, it'll actually make it to turn into add. So if you mainly are going to be using replace, then you can, but then you're like, oh, I didn't quite get enough over, you can hold down shift without having to change those options there. And then I don't know what symmetric difference is. Oh, I see what that does. Okay. I've never used symmetric difference, but it seems like it's pretty much the opposite of intersect. So it selects all that is not the same between the two selections. So if you see, if I try to draw in this area, that is not selected. Only this other part is selected. And then not related to the select tool, I mean, it is related to the select tool, but you don't necessarily have to be on the select tool to do this is Control A, which selects everything. So select that, click Control A, selects the whole canvas. Control Shift A deletes any selections you have. So if I have different things in here, and Control Shift A will just clear the selection. And then the other one is Control Shift I inverts the selection. So you see here, we're drawing in here, you can only draw on what's selected, and Control Shift I inverts the selection. So it might look like this part is still selected, but it's actually the outside part that is now selected. This is quite the modern art that we're making here. So that's the shortcut keys that I use frequently. So Control A, Control Shift A, and Control I. And then other than those, so that's going to be how you use the rectangle selection. If you want to use the freehand selection, the circle selection, the polygon selection, all of those are going to have those same actions. Same thing with the contiguous selection tool and the similar color selection tool. These ones have a few extra options too. So the contiguous selection tool and the color selector tool, first thing you want to pay attention to is actually this reference. So if you're on this first option, it's only going to pay attention to the single layer. So say we have a bunch of different layers that we have different things drawn onto. If you have this first option selected, it doesn't care about these other layers. Only the layer that you have, that you're clicked on, it cares about. So see how it's only selecting that M section? Whereas if you have the second option, it's actually going to look at every single layer and treat it as if it's all the same. But with that kind of option, you can see that it just kind of selects around an object. It kind of tries to deduce where the object is placed. And one thing that is important when looking at this is the threshold. So the threshold essentially says how sensitive it is. If you turn this down all the way to 1, then it is only, it's only going to select things that are the exact same color, more or less. As you turn this up, like say if we turn it up super high, it's actually going to just select the whole thing, because these are close enough in color for that threshold that it's fine with selecting everything. So depending on what you're trying to select, if the colors were super close and you're trying to separate them, you might have to turn it down really low. If you have a lot of shadows that you still want to get in the selection, you might have to turn up higher. So that just kind of depends. Normally also, with alongside the threshold, you want to look at the adjustments. So I always have anti-aliasing clicked, and I put my grow to 1 and my feather to 1. And that's essentially just going to make it a softer selection so that you don't get a bunch of harsh, clear, pixelated edges. Depending on what you're doing, you might want a different option clicked. The other tool, so with the continuous selection one, it's just going to select the one part that you click. So you see they're separated. But with the similar color tool, if you click on an object, it's actually going to find anything that's that color. And again, it has the threshold and the grow things that work the same way as they do in the contiguous thing. We already talked about the different selection things. So those different selection shortcut keys work no matter what type of selection you're doing. So say we had this and we wanted to color a shape outside of it, we could do Control Shift I and then be able to color outside of it. Then deselect everything with Control Shift A. Then other shortcut keys that you should be able to figure out because they're pretty standard is Control Z, undoes, that sounds wrong. Control Y, redoes things. I guess one that's not common is, say you're zoomed in and you want to move over a little bit, but you don't want to like go down here and have to move the slider. Well, for one, you can actually move this around in the overview, or if you hold down Shift and click and drag, you can move around like that. And then the scroll wheel is your zoom. And then the hotkey I've been using a lot is just 2, which will just fit the canvas to the screen so you can see everything. So now, moving on past selections, we're going to look at the different layers. So layers are super important just for keeping your work organized. Some important things that I use frequently would be the lock alpha. So you see all of them have these 3 buttons off to the right. This far right one is locking the alpha, and what that does is it makes it so that you can only color where there's already things. So say that we really like this shape, but we want it to be a different color. You can either use the brush, and if the alpha is locked, we can brush over it, or you can also, I more frequently than not use the rectangle tool, which again is Shift R, and then you can just drag over it. And that way, you don't have to worry about getting the perfect color the first time that you draw something, because you can just do lock alpha. The other thing, if for some reason you don't want to lock the alpha, you can right-click on the layer and click Select Opaque, and that essentially functions the same way. But if it's something that you know you want that shape to stay there forever, you're never going to change the shape, then it makes sense to just lock the alpha. And then after that, the next thing would be to the inherit alpha. So inherit alpha means that it's going to look at all of the layers below it, and it's not going to draw outside of those layer bounds. So say we hide the background, as you can see, all of that blue disappeared because this part is clear now. If we show the background again, then the blue comes back because now there's something to draw over. But say that we want the blue to be here, but we still want the background color. The way that you would have to do that, the only way I know how to do that, is again right-clicking on this brown layer, select Opaque, and then Control-Shift-I to invert the selection. Go back to the blue layer, and if you hit Delete, it'll delete all the blue that's not in those bounds. Or, of course, you could use the brush and the eraser tool and erase it that way. Both of those would be viable options. That's not what I meant to click. So, in here, now say that we want these two, or let's say we want this layer and this layer, but we want them to function as one layer. We decided that we want these two shapes added together, and we want them to be the same color. We could, of course, lock the alphas of both of them and change both of their colors. Make sure that when you're using the rectangle tool that you have the right brush selected, because if you have the eraser selected, it will erase things. I do that a lot without realizing it. Just, you know, when something's on a lower layer and there's so many things over it that it's hard to see, and then I'm wondering why it's not changing the color I wanted, it's because I erased it instead of adding something. So just always check your brush and make sure it's the right brush. But as I was saying, if you want these to be the same color, you could block both alphas and change both of their colors, and that'd be fine. That would work. But what you could also do is if you click on the top layer, or, you know, just the layer that's on top, make sure they're next to each other. Click the layer that's on top. Control-E will merge them into one layer. So now when I lock the alpha, they change at the same time without me having to change both of them. And they've become a single layer. The final thing to talk about concerning layers is layer styles. I actually don't know if that's what they're called: layer mask, layer styles, layer blending modes. Krita has a ton of different layer styles, more than most programs that I'm aware of. So yours isn't going to show up like this. You're going to have different ones up here in the favorites, but essentially if you go through these, and anything that is checkmarked is going to show up in your favorites. So I just have normal, decrease value, and increase value. Let's see. So normal is in mix, if you want to check that one. Normal should already be checked by default, just because that's the normal layer style. That's what you'd expect the layers to function as. and then increase value is in HSV, as well as decrease value. But again, those are the ones that I use. And I went and unchecked everything else because I don't use them. So normal, like I said, is exactly as you'd expect. And so you're right, depending on which layer you're selected, that's what this is going to affect. The other two that I used, as mentioned, was increase value and decrease value. Not going to go into exactly what those do right now, but just know that that is where you would find them. And if you look at my other video tutorials, I use those as well as dodge and burn occasionally. Dodge and burn essentially function the same as these two, but that's covered more in some of my other tutorials. So that is how you change the layer style, though. And related to layer styles, I guess the one other shortcut that I use a ton, specifically when making CC textures, is Control L. And that brings up this panel, which is the levels filter. I'm not going to go into what these do, because I show that in a different tutorial, but if you watched a different tutorial and suddenly this appeared and you didn't know how it got there, it was Control L. The other way that you can find that is in Filter, Adjust, Levels. Okay, so that's levels taken care of. And then the one other thing that I wanted to show was text, because sometimes, you know, you want a shirt to have text on it, and so if you go to this T up here at the top, click and drag, it'll create a text box that you can type anything into, and this isn't going to update until you click save. Once you click save, it'll update. You can change the color either with this wheel, or if you want to select a color that's on the screen. I don't know. Oh, well, then you can click the little eyedropper tool. Let's make it black so it's easy to see. Obviously, you can change the size, if it's bold or not, italic, and again, you have to click save to see it update on screen. Obviously, there's this preview right here of what it's doing too. That's the font. There's a lot of other options here that I don't play with a ton, but you can actually make this multi-lines too. So that's left justified, center, you know, basic text editing type options. Let's just put this back in. And I say that I know that a lot of simmers don't like English being in their game because it breaks immersion, so you're going to want to get some Simlish fonts if you want to make CC with Simlish on it. The ones that I recommend are by Franzilla. I download all of her stuff from Mod The Sims. She does have a Tumblr account too, but she has a ton of fonts to choose from. I'm pretty sure she has multiple packs, and this is just one of the font packs that she uses. But you can look through all of them and decide which ones you want, or you can just get one, and then I'll show you how to download these really quick. So let's say that we want, I don't know, this one, or yeah, this one. So we see this font, we're like, oh, that's super cute. We want to look at this name here, Lemonberry Clear. And then in her download area, Lemonberry Clear, you can find it and click download. And there's a lot of other creators who have made Simlish fonts too, so you can just look those up online. Once it's downloaded, click on it. If you have Windows 10, once you click on it, you can actually, if it's opened in WinRAR, you can double click on it on the font file and click install, or you can move it temporarily to the desktop, and then in here go to font settings, and then you can click and drag it into there, and that will install it onto your computer for use in most programs. You are going to have to restart your program and able to use any fonts you've downloaded. So let's just do that really quickly. Close. No, we don't need to save it. Let's open it. Just create a new file again. Again, with the text tool, click and drag. Testing. save. And now we have to scroll down and find the font. So all of her fonts start with Simlish, Franzi, I believe. So you can type Sim. But if you just type in Sim, then you can see all of, specifically Franzilla's fonts. Their naming convention always starts with Simlish. So if you type in Sim, then you should be able to find them. And as you can see, I have 4 different ones downloaded. This is the one that we just got. We're probably going to want to make it bigger. But now you've got that there. Now you've got your Simlish words. This is so that you can make any CC with Simlish on it that you want. And like I said, I love all of her fonts, and because she has so many options, it's just so much easier to just have the one place where you can go to find a bunch of different options for different scenarios. You know, she has these ones that look like handwriting, ones that look like cursive, ones that look like just like typed on a computer, this chalkboard styled one. Honestly, I love them all so much. I believe that's everything though, so I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions. I might have forgotten some things, and I know that I talk kind of fast just because I talk fast when I'm nervous. Yeah, leave any questions in the comment, like if you like, and I hope that this helped. Bye.